There's a lie every helpless person tells themselves at the bottom of the dark. No one is coming. No one even knows. She told herself that lie for 11 days, folded up small inside a locked room, and on the 12th day she stopped believing anyone would ever read the words she'd hidden. The thing about a note is that it doesn't care who finds it. It waits. It rode 90 miles in the false bottom of a coffee tin, past 3 men who would have killed her for writing it, and it landed on my counter with the trade goods on an ordinary Tuesday. And I, God forgive me, almost swept it into the stove with the rest of the wrapping paper. I keep a ledger of everything. Every nail, every debt, every man who passes through, and every man who doesn't come back. But I don't have a column for the moment a stranger with a scarred trigger hand unfolded a scrap of paper, read 4 lines in a woman's shaking hand, and went very still in a way that told me somebody was about to die. This is the story of that note, of the woman who wrote it believing no one would save her, and of the quiet man who read it and decided that no one was a coward's arithmetic he wasn't willing to sign his name to. Stay with me, I'll keep the accounts honest. I always do. The rain that Tuesday came sideways, the way it does out here maybe twice a year, hard enough to make the tin roof of my station sound like a man drumming his fingers on a coffin lid. I'd counted 41 such storms in the 11 years I'd run the relay at Dead Fork, and I remember I was adding this one to the tally in my head when the freight wagon came slewing out of the gray. My name is Harlan Poole. I keep a way station, a store, and a set of books nobody ever asks to see. I am 53 years old, I have a bad hip and a worse temper before coffee, and I have made a small, mean peace with the fact that nothing of consequence has ever happened at Dead Fork and nothing ever will. I keep ledgers the way other men keep dogs for company, and because they don't lie to me. 41 storms, 206 travelers so far that year. $19 owed to me by a mule skinner named Cobb who I will never see again. I write these things down because if I don't, they didn't happen. That is the whole of my philosophy. You may have a better one. The freighter's name was Odell, a thin, wet, apologetic man who ran goods between the mining camps up north and the trade posts down along the river. He came in dripping, stamping, cursing the mud in a friendly way, and I helped him carry his crates under the porch overhang while the rain tried to drown us both. Coffee, flour, bolt cloth, a barrel of nails I'd been waiting 3 weeks for. And a dented tin of coffee that had, he said, come down from a place called Ketch's crossing along with a note asking me to hold it for pickup. Ketch, I said, and wrote the name in my book without thinking because I write everything. You know it. Know of it? Everyone along the river knew of Bram Ketch. He'd bought up the only good water for 40 miles in a dry stretch and made himself a little king of it, a trading post, a corral, a bunkhouse of men who worked cheap because Ketch didn't ask where they'd been before. He was the sort of man who was polite to your face and owned your throat by evening. I'd met him twice and disliked him twice, which by my accounting is a consistent man. I stacked the coffee tin on the shelf and thought no more about it. That was the first mistake, though not the last and not the worst. The gunslinger came in an hour behind the storm. I don't call him a gunslinger because he swaggered. He didn't. He came in quiet, hat streaming, and asked in a low voice whether I had a dry corner and a bowl of anything hot, and he paid before he ate, which is a thing so rare I noted it. He was maybe 40, lean the way a whip is lean, with a face that had been handsome once and had since been rented out to hard weather. His right hand had a scar across the back of it, an old burn, puckered and pale, and I watched the way he kept that hand loose and near his hip even sitting down, even eating, even tired, and that is why I call him a gunslinger. A man's body tells you what his life has been. His body had spent a long time being ready. He gave his name as Roan. Just the one word, the way some men do when the rest of the name is nailed to a wanted poster somewhere, and I didn't press. I have learned that the surest way to keep a dangerous man peaceful is to want nothing from him. We talked a little the way men do in a storm. He was headed nowhere in particular, which is its own kind of address. He'd been a soldier, I guessed, and then something after being a soldier that he liked less. He asked about the road south. I told him about the water at Ketch's crossing, that it was the only reliable stop in that stretch, and I watched something pass behind his eyes at the name, not recognition exactly, but a kind of listening. As if he'd heard the name before and filed it under later. He'd have ridden on the next morning, and this would be no story at all, except that the tin of coffee fell off my shelf. It was the cat did it, my half-wild barn cat that I feed against my own better judgment. up on the shelf hunting a mouse, and down came the tin, and the lid sprang, and coffee went across my clean floor in a brown fan. I swore. I got the broom. And sweeping, my broom caught the edge of a false bottom that had lifted loose in the fall, a thin round of tin, cut to fit, and under it a folded scrap of paper gone soft with damp. I'm an honest man in the small ways that cost nothing and a coward in the large ones, and I want you to know I very nearly threw it in the fire. A note hidden in a false bottom is a note that means trouble, and I had lived 11 years at dead fork precisely by declining trouble whenever it was offered. My hand actually went toward the stove. Then I unfolded it instead. That is the one decent thing I did in this whole account, and I've thought since that a man's whole worth can turn on whether he opens the note or burns it, and most of us will never know which kind we are until the paper is in our hand. The writing was small and careful, and getting less careful toward the end, the way writing does when the hand is shaking or the light is failing or both. It said, "Whoever reads this, I am kept at Ketch's crossing against my wanting. He killed the man I came with and tells them I am his wife. I am not. I am sailor of the Chiricahua, and my people believe me dead. The window is nailed. I have hidden this where the tins are packed. If you have any mercy, send word to Fort Bowie or to my uncle Nahilze, who camps by the Willow Spring. Do not come loud. He has 8 men. I do not think anyone will come, but I could not stop from asking." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, and it was the third reading that got me, because on the third reading I stopped seeing the words and started seeing the woman, someone real, someone whose hand had cramped around a stub of pencil, who had done the hard mathematics of hope and come out the other side with a number close to 0 and had written the note anyway. I do not think anyone will come, but I could not stop from asking. There is more courage in that one sentence than in most of the graves I've dug. I sat down. The cat, unrepentant, licked coffee off the floor. I don't know how long I sat there with it, long enough that Roan noticed. He'd been cleaning a pistol at the far table, unhurried, and he looked up and saw my face, and something in him went to that stillness I'd marked earlier. "Bad news," he said. "I'm not a brave man. I want that on the record in the ledger in my own hand. My whole life I have avoided exactly this moment, the moment where you are handed someone else's drowning and asked to decide whether you can swim. My mouth wanted to say nothing, spilled some coffee, go back to your gun. Ketch had 8 men. I had a bad hip and a book of numbers. The sensible entry, the entry that 11 years of survival had taught me to make, was to send word quiet to the fort like she asked, and let soldiers and time and God sort it out, and to keep my own name out of the tally. Instead, I got up, and I carried the note across the room, and I put it down in front of the stranger, because I had looked at his ready hand all evening, and some animal part of me understood that this was a man built for exactly the thing I could not do. "Read it," I said, "then tell me I imagined it." He read it. He read it the way he did everything, without hurry, and I watched his scarred hand flatten the paper very gently on the table, the way you'd smooth a sheet over someone sleeping. When he got to the end, he didn't say anything for a long moment. The rain drummed. The cat purred, obscene in the quiet. "Ketch's crossing," he said finally. "You said it's south. 2 days' ride, maybe less hard." I hesitated. "She says 8 men. She says don't come loud. She says send word to the fort. That's all she's asking. That's the same thing." "How long's this note been sitting in your tin?" I looked at the packing. Odell had said the coffee came down 3 weeks ago and had sat at a trade post before that. I did the arithmetic and didn't like the sum. Could be a month, could be more. Roan nodded slowly, like a man confirming a debt. "A month," he said. "Sending word to the fort takes another week if the telegraph's up, which it isn't, so it's a rider, so it's 10 days, and then the army moves at the speed the army moves, which for one Apache woman a man swears is his wife is no speed at all." He wasn't arguing with me. His voice had no heat in it. He was just laying the numbers on the table beside mine, and his numbers were worse, and both of us knew his were right. "She's already been waiting the length of everyone deciding she's someone else's problem. That's what a month is. That's what the fort is. That's what don't come loud buys her." I had no answer. I keep a ledger. I know a true accounting when I hear one. "I'll still send word to the fort," he said, standing, and for the first time I heard something under the flatness, something old and banked and very hot. "A man ought to have soldiers behind him if he can, but I'm not going to sit 2 days south of a woman in a nailed room writing to strangers, waiting on the army to feel like writing. I've done that kind of waiting before." He looked at his scarred hand as if it belonged to someone he used to know. I did it once and I've been paying for it ever since. I'm not doing it again. You don't even know her, I said. It came out smaller than I meant. No, he agreed, but she asked anyway. You don't leave that unanswered. He picked up the note, folded it back along its soft creases, and put it inside his coat over his heart, where a man keeps the things he means to be accountable for. You said her uncle camps by a willow spring. Nahilze, you know where that is. I did roughly. There's a spring 2 days southwest, an old Chiricahua watering place, and I'd traded with the people who camped there, good trades, honest people, a lot more honest than most whites I dealt with. I said as much. Then that's the first ride, Roan said. Not the fort, her people. She wrote my uncle and do not think anyone will come in the same note, which means she doesn't even believe her own people know she's alive to look for. Somebody has to carry them the truth. And her people going in with me is worth more than a company of cavalry who'll want to arrest half of them on the way. He said it plainly, as fact, and I understood then that this was a man who had learned the shape of the country's cruelties and had decided, quietly, personally, to weigh a single woman's note heavier than all of it. I should tell you I volunteered nobly. I didn't. I stood there doing the sums a coward does the risk, the 8 men, my hip, my safe 11 years, and Roan watched me do them without contempt the way you watch a man count change. I'm not asking you to fight, he said at last, gently. You've got a store and a bad leg and no cause to die for a stranger, but you can point a road. You can carry word to that spring while I ride to the fort. Nobody has to be brave, Poole, somebody just has to move. He settled his hat. The reason no one comes is that everybody's waiting to see if they have to. She counted on that. She wrote the note believing it. Let's make her wrong about the one thing she was sure of. Let's make her wrong. I have run those 3 words over in my mind 1,000 times since. It is, I think, the truest definition of mercy I have ever been handed. To take a person who has done the grim arithmetic of hopelessness, and to prove with your own body and your own risk that they carried a number wrong. I got out my ledger. My hand wasn't as steady as I'd have liked. I opened to a clean page. I always start these things on a clean page. And I wrote the date, and I wrote Selah, Chiricahua, held at Ketch's Crossing, and under it I wrote do not think anyone will come, copying her own words because I wanted the account to remember that she'd believed that. And then, underneath, in my own cramped bookkeeper's hand, I wrote the first entry of the debt I was about to spend the rest of the story paying. Somebody came. The rain was slackening. Roan was already checking the loads in his cartridge belt with the scarred hand, quick and sure. And outside in the settling dark I could hear my own mule stamping, sensing, the way animals do, that the safe long boredom of Dead Fork had finally, after 11 years, come to an end. We rode out before the mud had dried, which is to say we rode out stupid, but there are hours when the smart thing and the right thing sit at opposite ends of the road, and you have to pick which one to be late for. Roan turned east for Fort Bowie to leave word, one honest try at doing it the lawful way, so that if it all went to hell nobody could say we hadn't. I turned southwest for the Willow Spring with my ledger in my saddlebag and my old sharps across the pommel, feeling every one of my 53 years in a hip that hated a saddle. We'd meet, we agreed, at a dry wash a half-day short of Ketch's Crossing, 2 nights on. If one of us didn't come, the other was to go on alone or not at all, as his conscience directed. Roan said that last part like a man who'd left people at rendezvous before and knew the arithmetic of it. I want to tell you about the ride to the spring, because it's where I stopped being only a bookkeeper. I'd traded with the Chiricahua at that spring for years, but always across a counter of goods, always with the till between us. Coming to them as a supplicant, an old white man with terrible news and a scrap of paper, that was a different country. I found the camp by the smoke and the willows, a dozen brush shelters and a horse herd and children who went still and watchful the moment they saw me. The way children learn to when their whole short lives have taught them that a white man riding in usually means something is about to be taken. I asked for Nahilze. It took a while and some hard looks, and a young man with a rifle who stood very close to my horse until an older man came out of one of the shelters, spare, gray-streaked, with a face like weathered stone and eyes that had buried more than any man should have to and gone on getting up in the mornings anyway. I am not a graceful man. I got down off my horse, which my hip protested, and I held out the note, and I said the only thing I had rehearsed. Your niece Selah is alive. She's held at Ketch's Crossing. She wrote this thinking none of you knew. I came to tell you you were wrong. He didn't snatch it. That's the thing I remember. A lesser man, a man less schooled by grief, would have grabbed. Nahilze took the paper slowly and read it. He read English, which I hadn't expected and was ashamed of not expecting, and I watched a year of mourning come apart on his face in the space of 4 lines. They'd thought her dead. Killed with the man she'd traveled with, months back, no bodies recovered, and they had grieved her and cut their hair and sung her over to the dead. And here in my dirty hand was the paper that undid all of it, that said she has been alive and alone and asking every single one of those days. He said something in Apache, low, to the young man with the rifle, and the young man's face changed. And then there were more of them, and I stood in the middle of a camp learning, slowly, the shape of a grief turning into something with a harder edge. Nahilze's English, when he turned it on me, was careful and cold and unbearably dignified. You white men killed the man she loved and stole her and called her wife. And you, he looked at me. Why does this white man come? What does he want? It's a fair question. I've asked it of myself. I could have dressed it up. Instead, I told him the truth because I keep honest books even when the truth costs me. Nothing, I nearly burned it. I'm a coward and I keep a store and I've spent 11 years staying out of everything. But she wrote I could not stop from asking and I found I couldn't stop from answering. There's a man riding to the fort. He's coming to help get her out. He said your people going in were worth more than the army. He's right about most things. I'd like to help if you'll have an old man who's more use with a ledger than a gun. Nahilze looked at me a long time. The banked grief in him was terrible to stand near. But he was, I came to understand over the next hours, a genuinely wise man, the kind who has been given every reason to hate a whole race of people and has, at great private cost, refused to let the reasoning make his decisions for him. That is a discipline I've met in perhaps 4 people in my life, and 3 of them were Apache. You could be leading us to a killing ground, he said. A note, an old man alone, it is the kind of trick that has emptied our camps before. It is, I admitted. I can't prove I'm not. All I've got is that I'm too poor a liar to be worth Ketch's trouble, and that man riding to the fort has no reason on this earth to do this except that he read her words and couldn't leave them lie. You'll have to weigh us. I'd weigh us careful, too, in your place. Something in the plainness of it reached him. Or maybe it was simpler, maybe it was just that she was alive and asking, and a man who has mourned an empty grave will risk a great deal on the chance to fill it with a living body instead. He gave orders. Men checked weapons. A woman I took to be Tsela's mother came out and stood very still holding the note to her chest, and I had to look at my boots. We rode for the wash the next day, 7 of us, Nahilze, 5 young men who rode like they'd been born doing it, and me, jouncing along on my mule, keeping up out of pure stubbornness. And it was on that ride that Nahilze, pacing his horse beside my mule, told me the part of it that I've carried heaviest since. You should know what you are riding into, he said. Tsela is not only my niece. Before she was taken, she was to be a peace bringer. There was talk, real talk, careful talk between our band and the fort of coming in without more blood. She spoke both tongues. She was to carry the words between. Ketch knew this. His voice didn't change, which made it worse. Ketch profits when there is no peace. When we raid, when the army rides, he sells to both water and grain and guns. A peace would ruin him. So he did not only take a woman. He took the one who could have stopped a war, and he buried her in a locked room, and he has spent these months making sure the talking died with her name. I rode a while and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say that wasn't small. All this time I'd been carrying it in my head as a rescue, 1 woman, 1 note, 1 wrong to set right. And it was that. But it was also that Bram Ketch had looked at the single human being who might have kept 100 people from dying, and had locked her in a room to protect his ledger. I keep a ledger. I understand a man protecting his numbers. And I understood, riding to that wash, that I had spent 11 years being a smaller, gentler version of exactly the same sin, keeping my accounts clean by keeping my hands empty, letting the world's arithmetic be somebody else's to balance. The difference between me and Ketch was one of degree, not of kind, and that is a hard thing to learn at 53 with a note in your saddlebag, and a good man riding to a fort for a woman he's never met. Roan was waiting at the wash. He'd ridden hard, he was gray with dust, and the news from Fort Bowie was about what he'd expected. The commander would look into the matter and dispatch a patrol when resources allowed, which is army for not this month and maybe not this year. Roan reported it flatly, without bitterness, a man confirming a figure he'd already penciled in. Then he saw Nahilze and the 5 young men, and something in his hard face eased by a fraction. "You're her uncle," he said. It wasn't a question. He got down and he took the note from over his heart, and this is the thing I wrote in my ledger that night. This is the entry I'm proudest to have witnessed. He held it out and gave it back. This is yours, he said, or hers, not mine. I only borrowed it to have something to be accountable to. Nahilze took it, and the two men looked at each other, the drifting white gunman and the grieving Apache elder, across 300 years of every reason not to trust one another, and came to some silent private treaty that I wasn't party to and couldn't have signed if I were. Tell me the ground, Roan said. Tell me the men, tell me where they keep her, and tell me one more thing. He looked at Nahilze steady. If this goes bad, if it comes to killing and the army does finally ride and finds white men dead and Apache guns, your people hang for it, not me and not Poole. I know how that ledger's kept in this country. So I'll go in first and I'll go in loudest, and if there's a rope to be earned, I'll earn it. Your men come for her and then they go fast and they were never here. That's the only way I'll do it. I won't buy her out with a war that gets the rest of you killed. It was, I realized, the second time in 3 days I'd watched this man do the thing I most admire and least manage. Look squarely at the machinery of the world's cruelty, understand exactly how it would grind, and then deliberately step under the wheel himself so it wouldn't take someone weaker. He wasn't being noble about it. He said it like a man reading a bill of lading. That's what made it unbearable. Nahilze was quiet a long moment. You would take the hanging for her. I've got less to lose than a whole band, Roan said simply. The arithmetic's easy. And there it was again, arithmetic. We were all of us, I understood, doing sums. Ketch had done his and locked a woman in a room. The army had done theirs and shrugged. I had done mine for 11 cowardly years. And here was a scarred stranger doing a sum where his own neck was the cheap side of the ledger and a stranger's freedom was the dear side, and choosing, calmly, to spend himself. We made camp cold that night, no fire, close enough to Ketch's crossing to hear its dogs. I got out my book by moonlight and wrote the day down, the spring, the grief coming off Nahilze's face, the note passing hand to hand, all of it. And at the bottom I wrote a thing I don't fully have the right to, but wrote anyway, because a ledger is where I put the truths I can't say out loud. She was wrong, 6 came. And one of them is going to try to spend himself to prove it. Roan sat a little apart in that stillness of his, oiling the scarred hands work in the dark. I asked him, because I'm a bookkeeper and I can't stand an unexplained figure, what he'd meant, back at the station, about having done this kind of waiting before and paying for it since. He was quiet so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, there was a woman wrote for help once, long time back, and it came across my desk when I still wore a blue coat and thought orders were the same as right. And I did the same thing. I sent it up the line. I waited for it to be somebody's job. He turned the scarred hand over in the moonlight. By the time it got to be somebody's job, there wasn't anybody left to save. I burned my hand pulling what was left out of what they'd done, so I'd have something to remember it by. He looked at me, and it was the only time I ever saw the flatness leave his eyes entirely. That's all a gunslinger is, Poole. A man who answered the note too late once and can't stop answering the next one on time. I wrote that down too, some things you have to. Below us, Ketch's dogs barked at nothing, and in a nailed room somewhere in that dark, a woman who thought no one was coming was, though she didn't know it yet, 200 yards from the largest lie of her life being made false. I've written a great many things in my ledgers over the years, but I have never known how to keep the account of what happened at Ketch's crossing before dawn. Numbers fail at the edges of certain nights. I'll set it down as plain as I can and let you do your own totaling. The plan was Roan's, and it was built entirely around the thing he'd promised Nahilze, that the noise and the blame and the rope, if there was one, would be his and mine and no one else's. He would go in from the front loud, a lone white drifter making a lone white drifter's kind of trouble, drawing Ketch's 8 men toward the sound the way a struck match draws the eye. I'd be at the corral with the horses ready, an old man doing the one useful thing an old man can do, holding the way out open. And Nahilze and his 5 would slip to the back, to the nailed window, silent, and take Sailor out through the dark while every gun on the place was pointed the wrong way. In and gone, never there. And you, I'd asked Roan, when it's loud and they're all looking at you. Then I'll have their attention, he'd said, and she'll have her window, like it was nothing, like his body was just the cheapest coin he happened to have on him. It went at first the way he'd built it, that's the cruel part. It very nearly went clean. I held the horses. My hands shook and I hated them for it and held on anyway. In the gray light I heard Roan's voice ring out across the yard. I never learned what he said. some hard, drawling challenge, a stranger calling Ketch a liar and a woman stealer to his face in front of his own men, which is a thing designed to make 8 guns forget everything in the world but the one man saying it. I heard boots. I heard the particular silence of men taking cover. I heard Ketch's voice answer, oily and amused and certain, the voice of a man who has never once in his life imagined losing. And behind the buildings, where I couldn't see, I heard the small, dry sounds of Nahilze's people at the window, a board easing, a nail's low complaint, and then nothing, which was the sound of it working. Then the first shot, and after that no plan survived. I won't pretend I saw it all. I saw pieces the way you do between managing the panicking horses and my own panicking heart. I saw muzzle flash stitch the gray. I heard Roan's pistol answer, that scarred hand doing the work it had spent a lifetime getting ready for, deliberate, spaced, a shot for a purpose and never a shot wasted. I saw a man of Ketch's fall by the trough. I heard Ketch shouting orders that had gone useless because the thing he was defending was already, silently, going out a window at his back. And I saw Tsela. I'll carry it to my own grave, that first sight of her. A thin figure in a torn dress, hair shorn short the way grief cuts it, half carried between 2 of Nahilze's young men across the open ground toward me and the horses, moving on legs that hadn't walked free in months, her face turned back once toward the sound of the guns with an expression I have no column for. She'd written, "I do not think anyone will come." And she was watching, in real time, the proof that she'd been wrong, men risking everything in the dark for the words she'd hidden in a coffee tin, and released like a message into a flood, never believing it would reach a shore. She reached the horses. Nahilze was there, he'd come round, he had her uncle and niece, the empty grave filled with a living body, and for one instant in all that noise there was something so complete between them that even the guns seemed to pause for it. He got her up onto a horse. His 5 were mounting. The way out was open. It had worked. It worked for everyone but the man who'd made it work. Ketch, I learned this after in pieces from Nahilze, because I didn't see the whole of it. Ketch understood in the middle of the noise that the front door challenge had been a lie to cover a backdoor theft, and he turned, cold and quick the way genuinely dangerous men turn, away from Roan and toward the corral, toward the escaping horses, toward Tsela. And Roan, who had promised the young Apache men would go home, and no rope would find them, did the only thing left in his private arithmetic that would keep that promise true. He stepped out of his cover into the open, between Ketch's gun and the horses, and made himself the only thing worth shooting at. It bought them the seconds, it bought Tsela the yards. It bought Nahilze's 5 their whole long lives, unhanged back at the Willow Spring. And it cost precisely what Roan had penciled in at the wash, weeks of nights and 1 note ago. It cost the man who answered on time. They got away clean. Every Apache who rode into Ketch's crossing rode out of it. That was the sum Roan had wanted, and he got it, and he paid for it, and I have never been able to decide whether that is the most tragic thing I know or the most beautiful, or whether at the far end those are the same words spelled differently. I did what an old bookkeeper could. In the confusion I got to him, dragged him, that scarred hand loose and open now, its long readiness finally spent, got him across a horse, and we ran because Ketch was hit too and his men were leaderless, and the dawn was full of the particular chaos that follows the collapse of a certain man's certainty. We ran southwest, toward the spring, toward the people he'd bought a future for. He lasted the ride. Mostly. There was a while in the gray full light with the willows coming up ahead where he was awake enough to talk, and I leaned close because I keep honest books, and I wanted his account in his own words if he had any to give. "Did it take?" he asked. His voice was very quiet. "Did she get clear?" "She got clear," I said. "They all did. Just like you drew it." He was quiet, and then the ghost of something moved on his ruined, handsome face, not quite a smile, more like a man setting down a thing he'd carried a long way. "Then I answered one on time," he said. "That's the whole of it, Poole. That's all a man gets to do about the ones he answered too late. Answer the next one on time." His hand, the scarred one, moved, and I understood he wanted the note, so I took it from over his heart where he'd carried it since Dead Fork and put it in his fingers, and he held it 4 lines in a shaking woman's hand. I could not stop from asking, and he held onto that instead of onto me. "I want to tell you he made it to the spring. I want to tell you Tsela thanked him, and Nahilze clasped his hand, and there was some clean and finished thing, some balanced page. There wasn't, grief doesn't balance, it just gets carried by whoever's left standing. Here is what I can tell you. What I said in my ledger by the willow spring that night with my hands still not steady. The last honest entries in the whole account. Selah lived, she went home. Her hair grew back. And because she lived, the careful talking she'd been stolen to stop, the peace bringing, the words between the fort and the band, it wasn't dead after all. She carried it. Months later, I heard there was a coming in without blood, a thing so rare in this country that men wrote it in newspapers, and no newspaper knew or ever will that it happened because a woman hid a note in a coffee tin, and a bad-hipped coward opened it instead of burning it, and a scarred stranger read 4 lines and decided that no one was arithmetic he wouldn't sign. I went back to Dead Fork. I keep the store. I keep the books. I am, by every measure that shows in a ledger, exactly the small, safe man I was before. 41 storms, 200 travelers, $19 I'll never see from Cobb. But I keep one page now that isn't like the others. I copied her note onto it, word for word. I do not think anyone will come, but I could not stop from asking. And under it I keep the running account of a debt that doesn't close, in the only entry I've ever been sure was true all the way down.